Thanks for joining us. This is Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. Joining me today is the political professor, associate professor of IIUM, Dr. Syaza Shukri. She's also the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute fellow as well. Dr. Syaza, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. There's a lot of reforms that are currently being outlined by the Prime Minister and by the government, such as the institutionalizing the 10-year term limit or aggregated term limit for the Prime Minister. There's also this big topic right now that is currently being debated at the Parliament on the separation of the role of the Attorney General as well as the Public Prosecutor, and a few other reforms. And for the traditional supporter of Pakatan Harapan, these are the exact reforms that they've been always fighting for. And for the Conservatives, this might not necessarily be one of those things that they are pushing forward currently, as they feel that there are other priorities that needs to be discussed and executed first. Because of these different stages of interest, I would argue, not necessarily conflict of interest, but different interests. How do you think things are panning out right now, especially when we saw the Prime Minister making such announcements at the turn of the year that on one hand surprised some of the observers, but on the other hand is a much welcome relief, especially from the Pakatan Harapan voter base. How do you look into all of these situations before we deep dive into some of the reforms that we talked about just now?
I mean, I agree with you that the Prime Minister is doing all of this because of this is what the voters, the Pakatan Harapan voters have wanted for so long. Most of the question has been surrounding the timing. You know, why is it now in 2026? You know, we've heard all the arguments. You know, they've had, 2 years of stabilizing the government, so now it's the best time. But now we're also hearing the issue of, it seems like they're pushing it now. So why are you pushing these reforms? Again, the argument is this is what our base wants, but is it the best for the country at this moment? And that's why you brought up that's the argument from the other side. But if I may differ a little bit, I would say that from Perikatan Nasional's perspective, it's more of them playing politics, if I may say it that way. That I like you, I don't think that they disagree with it fundamentally. It's more about, okay, they can't just give in and say, sure, we support the Prime Minister. There have to be a bit of a bargaining here and there so that they can appear as this formidable opposition, because they're also talking to their bases, right? Yeah. They can't just say, yeah, we support whatever the Prime Minister is doing. So this is how I'm looking at it. Both are thinking of, if I may say, on the next general election. Everyone is in campaign period right now. So this is how I see it right now.
And then, of course, when we look at some of the overtures made, say for instance by the opposition, that they argue, especially Dr. Sri Taqiyuddin, he argued that at the Parliament last week, he argued that 10-year limit is something that needs to be postponed or pushed off, and issues like cost of living, issues like economic matters needs to be debated. ART, for instance, and then of course DAP making very strong remarks, anywhere from saying that in the Congress of July that they will sit, they might need to rethink about their position currently in the executive branch. So, do you feel that the administration currently has building pressure to deliver what is needed, or do you think that this is, quite frankly, business as usual?
Yeah, I think the pressure is on them now, because the pressure is not coming from within their own, with their own partners, right, within their own government. So how can they just say, okay, we're not going to look at this, or we're going to ignore this, because DAP is a major partner, the biggest seats within Pakatan Harapan as well. So how can you just ignore this biggest, if I might say, voter bloc for Pakatan Harapan? So they are under pressure. And also don't forget the 10-11 PKR MPs as well. So that's within Anwar's own party, right? So the pressure is very hard on them now to go forward with these reforms. But again, how do they navigate that? I mean, if you talk about economic issues, and those are the business as usual that they should not ignore, or, they should acknowledge. But the way that I see it is that, from my perspective, the government's thinking is they have focused on that for the past 2 years, right? 23, 24, 25, 3 years in fact. They have focused on cost of living issues, and
And the proof is in the pudding, with strong GDP numbers being registered for the entire of 2025. Ringgit is actually quite strengthening against 3.89 currently. I don't know how it will be soon, but Ringgit being the best currency performer in Asia, and so on. There's also this whole notion of the direct financial assistance that is actually quite helping the rakyat, so to speak. So there's a lot that is worth noting to be discussed, but there are also other issues that, I guess, the SPRM issue, for instance, that is currently being hotly contested by all factions right now. But that aside, let's deep dive into the actual policy that is currently being done. Putting the term limit of a prime minister to say 10 years, on the offset, of course, the progressives would welcome such an institution, and the conservatives are saying that now's not the time. But I fail to see their arguments. Maybe you could help us see what is the thinking behind the opposition of putting a term limit on a prime minister. Perhaps make us understand their point of view before we deep dive into the mechanics of how it could be done and could be done well in Malaysia.
Great. I like that you started with saying that the progressive have one views, conservative have another, because Malaysians are mostly conservative, so we have to think of it that way. So from their point of view, the argument is mostly on two things. Number one is why we're limiting a good leader, right? If someone is performing, why just say 10 years? And some of the examples that I keep on hearing when I talk to people, look at what Tun Mahathir did, right? He had 20 years, 22 years, and look how developed Malaysia has become. What would happen if he had left in 1991, right? Could we have seen the same Malaysia that we see today? So that's the first argument. The second argument is, I can't think of it right now. I forgot. It just slipped my mind. Yeah. But let's focus on that, because that is the biggest one that they kept on saying, that in a democratic sense, right, why are you putting a limit? People should be allowed to continue on, because putting a limit appears that you're stopping someone when they're at the height of it. Okay, now I remember my second point, which is that continuation of policies, right? Okay, that's the second thing that they always talk about.
Of which we all know how it has been since 2018 until 2026.
So that's the thing. If you...
A plethora of policies to pick from, we didn't have time to see if anything is good or bad, because it's just like, changing like fleetingly.
So they say like 10 years might be the same thing, that policies need time, especially economic policies. It needs time to mature and to see the result of it.
So, on the progressives' point of view, what was the intention behind such a proposal? Even though I think the argument could be as common sense, but still, let's get this out there. What was the thinking behind this push, and why the urgency to execute it now?
Right, common sense, yeah. I would like to push back on that, because I don't see that being such a common view among people today. Maybe for people like us who may be more aware of the pros and cons of things. So when we talk about why certain segments of population in Malaysia is pushing for this, I think the biggest argument that I've seen and I've heard is that they went through that period of strong leadership, centralized leadership, personalized leadership, and they don't want a repeat of that. Because on the other hand, we hear people saying, what's wrong with that, right? Like we just discussed earlier. But from those who lived through those periods, we saw how it erodes democratic rights and whatnot. So we want to institutionalize prime ministerial term, basically, right? So that it doesn't get out of hand as it did before. And more than that, more closer in time to us, we saw what happened with Datuk Sri Najib with 1MDB. So a lot of people wants to avoid a repeat of that, definitely, right? It's not just Tun Mahathir, we saw 1MDB as well. So these are all of the things that are playing in our mind that we want to avoid for the future of Malaysia.
We need to move on to the next subject, but before we do that, what is the probability of this getting passed in the Parliament? As I am made to understand it, it does require an amendment to the Constitution, therefore 2/3. Do you think that this administration can get 2/3 support to get this bill passed?
In my opinion, they can, because the thing is, I don't see much being said out there. On the opposition side, yes, initially there were some pushback, but it's not to the point where they won't support it. I think one of the latest things was about saying, okay, we can support this, but you have to have other kind of reforms as well. Before this, they were talking about making sure the Prime Minister could not also be the Finance Minister. So from those things that they've said, I look at it positively, that there might be support. And I think the thing is, they're not going to, they're going to support in principle. So how they negotiate with the government is another thing.
But say, for instance, in the UK, where the Chancellor of the Exchequer was never also carrying the role of the Prime Minister, I'm not too sure. Is it a law there in the UK, where the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister is meant to be separate, or by tradition they just don't do that?
I believe it must be a law, because I'm more familiar with the American political side. But yeah, I believe it's a law, because it has to be different people for that. Yeah.
For that particular role. Okay, let's now move on to the more much debated bill, which is the separation of the public prosecutor along with the Attorney General. The Attorney General, of course, the role is to advise the government on legal matters, acts on behalf of the government when it comes to legal views and legal proceeding, leads the Attorney General chambers, and of course, how it's organizing itself. And of course, the prosecutor or the Solicitor General, for instance, in that particular role, prosecutes people, and that role is actually quite critical, because it also means to prosecute their bosses, if it comes down to that.
Yeah.
And currently it is together, and as I made to understand it, it is of course a hereditary or inherited role when we were seeking independence, taking the shape and form of, say, for instance, the India and Indian rule, which is of course based on the UK rule. But of course, India has since separated it some decades ago, the UK as well, but Malaysia has not done that. So if we were to truly, say, emulate those kind of roles and separation of roles, it's high time that Malaysia does that. But then there is also the urgency and the push for it to be done ASAP.
Yep.
And that is where the pushback happens, especially from the PKR10, and their argument is on the mechanics and the details of it. Could you help us understand in terms of, first of all, from a political scientist standpoint, is this a reform policy that is good to be done? That's the first. Second is, how can it be done in Malaysian context, I suppose?
Right. Is it good to be done? I mean, maybe you're asking the wrong person. I believe I'm a Democrat. So I believe, yeah, it has to be done. It has to be done because of the conflict of interest that you mentioned, right? So it's for the betterment of Malaysia as a whole, for the nation as a whole. How can you have a person that advises the government that also could possibly prosecute, like you said, their own bosses if need be? And it's not just about that. They also have the power to not prosecute. Right? So that's something else.
So action and inaction as
well.
well.
Exactly. So we have to think about that. So from my point of view, definitely, if you're thinking about the future of democracy in Malaysia, what's best for the people, yes, we have to go for that. What's the second question just now?
The second question is, how could it be operationalized, I suppose? Yeah.
In Malaysia. So that is the more difficult question, because the way that I see it is that this is, on one hand, yes, this is the legal mechanism of doing this. But again, if you're asking me as a political sociologist, what about the people? How does the people view this? Do they understand? Because you can put all the mechanisms in place, but there might be workarounds in a way, or it might work against the people, because there are always influences out there that we can't really control. So for me, the best guardrails is for the people. Meaning that we have to develop that democratic culture, that norm, that they see and understand why we need this. Are we there yet? So that is my question. So this is why I see the gap. On one hand, we have like a sort of elites that are pushing for this, but the rest of the people may not care so much about it. And I think this is where, if I may say this on camera, this is where the opposition is playing their role by saying that, that's why we don't need this so much, because this is not a priority for the people.
And then, of course, it's not just this mechanics on operationalizing these kind of reforms. How does this play when it comes to the political scene? There's a lot that is currently happening in the country, and Sabah Sarawak, for instance, and Sarawak is still adamant on energy arguments and Petros and Petronas that is still currently happening. Sabah has got on a completely different wavelength. They just need to get off poverty, and the recent state elections have clearly showed that a wholesale rejection of Semenanjung politics is in the air. It really, if we've seen Sabah never being united, this is the case that is uniting them, despite the political spectrum that is currently happening in Sabah. And then, of course, in Semenanjung, we've seen how the East Coast has a completely different take on how politics should be run, and then on the West Coast, where it's completely different. How do you tie these various things that are currently happening on the ground, and how does this tie with us as a fabric of the nation? Are we truly a united nation, or are we slowly drifting apart and trying to not see each other's point of view even further, I suppose? It's a scary thought, but it is a thought that needs to be had. Yeah.
Well, that's a difficult one. To be honest, I do see rising polarization in the country, and it all started in 2018. Like you said, it started with this regional polarization between Semenanjung, Sabah, Sarawak, and also we look, like you said, within Semenanjung as well, right? This polarization between the conservative Malays on the right and I guess the rest somewhere in the center left. So we are polarizing, moving in different directions, and I think this is what makes it difficult for the government to kind of push anything. So that is one pessimistic view, right? Oh my God, how can we really bring everyone to support government policies and issues? But again, I think that we should kind of celebrate this, that this is what we talk about democracy, differences of views, differences of different perspectives. The question now is how do we manage it? So this is why I think the government should play its role in really explaining. So communication plays a big role here. What are their agenda? What are they doing? And how this is good for the people, for the country. But the thing is, a lot of people now have short-term views. So when I talk about politics with people, they're not seeing like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What do they care about how democracy is in Malaysia?
Short-termism is the biggest risk right now, I suppose.
Yeah, and that is why we have all of these different views, because we have different lived experiences. And the thing is, people run with this. People say, I can't see your point of view, I can't see your point of view. Well, at the end of the day, we all want to have a better life, better Malaysia. And this is what the government should be doing, I think.
You deal with a lot of young people. It's a challenge that I have never been able to grasp myself. I find young people very difficult, I suppose. But what is their take? What happens in your classrooms? And when you deal with these young scholars, these mahasiswa that we speak of, how do they view the country and the political scene?
To be honest, they're pessimistic. It's been a few years already. I've seen a similar trend. If I talk about trend, right, when I first started teaching about 7-8 years ago, students were a bit optimistic. They're talking about the things that we're talking about today: reform, better Malaysia, more democratic Malaysia. But I see a serious shift in trend. The young ones today that I get in my classes, and these are political science students, so they may be interested or have some knowledge.
Yeah.
They want to go back to a time that they read in their textbook in the 80s and the 90s. They want to go back to that more stable period politically.
Stable, structured. We know where the lines are drawn.
Yes. If before this, what I get from my students is they say, we only have 2 options back then. Barisan Nasional, Pakatan Harapan. They don't like it. They want more options. Guess what? The kids today tell me there are too many options. We don't like it. Having Pakatan, BN, Perikatan, GPS,
even within the names that you mentioned, there's slices and dices.
Exactly.
It's like
It's
the
too confusing.
Boston Tea Party group. You know, there's the Chuck Schumer group. You know, in the Democrats and so on.
Factionalism, yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't like this factionalism. They say this is, for them, it's not what democracy or politics is about. Even though I try to, factionalism should be common because, again, these are diverse views, even within the same party. If you have a big umbrella party, then you should expect factionalism, but they don't like it. So that is my fear for the country. Actually, that.
What about do you supervise postgraduate as well?
I do, yes.
How's their view? What is their view?
Unfortunately, my students are mostly international students, but I could
still, I mean, it's a flavor.
Exactly.
It's not just about the national flavor.
Exactly. I could say that they also hold the same view. It depends on nationality, right?
Okay.
Those from India might be a bit more, pro-democracy, because as Muslims, they are struggling in India right now, right?
So the context is very clear. Muslims in India is not facing a good time.
Correct.
It's as simple as that.
But if they're from Turkey, they're happy with the government. They're happy with that so-called stability, that 20 years stable, one party government. So they like that, which is what we experienced before, right? Because when I talk to them, they look up to
Erdogan
and they look up to Malaysia during Mahathir's period, and they see that this is kind of like what we had before. So there is this appetite for kind of strongman leadership that we kind of talked off camera earlier, that they want this sense of, we talk about how the world globally these days are so confusing, so they want that anchor. And if we talk globally, this is also why we're seeing a lot of this rise of right-wing populists, right-wing parties and factions, because people want an anchor.
Do you feel that the temperature is heating up when it comes to domestic politics, and do you feel that a general election is in the air much earlier than we think it would be? Say, for instance, what we scheduled is the parliament to be dissolved in November next year, and a general election must be held no later than, say, February 2028. Okay, that's the schedule or the timeline. But because of what is happening right now, and with the situation that the current administration is facing, are we facing an early election?
Okay, if I may, I see two parts to your question. Number one, and I look at the temperature, it's not that hot right now, to be honest. Yeah, in the sense that both sides are dealing with their own internal matters. Perikatan has their own issues, Pakatan has their own issues, PKR has their own issues. So everyone's like focusing on their own agenda and whatnot. So it's not really heating up to the point that we want to go to an election right now. But that's also the reason why we might have an election, because there's a sense of confidence by the incumbent, by the current government, looking at what is going with Perikatan. People are saying they should, seize this moment, and this is how Pakatan Harapan could perhaps get a second term. And don't forget, Barisan Nasional is quiet, but they're quite stable right now. And this is a good time actually for Pakatan and Barisan Nasional to have an election. And also the other argument is that, we want to bring all of the elections coming up together, Malacca, Sarawak, Johor, let's have everything together with the general election. So those are the calculations.
DAP has made it clear that they wanted it, they made it public, that they wanted it together, but I don't see any political leader saying that they want it the same, at least publicly. Privately, I'm not too sure, but yeah. But I think it's only Anthony Loke that's saying that, in terms of what we call this, synchronizing all the elections.
From my perspective, the thing with DAP right now, with let's just say DAP and Anwar, even though it's heating up in public, the way that I view it is they can't really proceed without each other, right? So Anthony Loke is saying all of these things, but can they really survive without PKR within Pakatan Harapan? And like we discussed earlier, Anwar also depends a lot on the support base of DAP. So even though all of these things are playing out right now, I go back to my earlier argument that it's for their own supporters. So while they are, like you say, it looks like it's heating up, but behind the scene, I don't see a strong pressure for the government to kind of do much at this moment.
Final question, Dr. Syaza. When it comes to the populace, do you feel that they want an election, or do you think that they still feel that let's give this administration a little bit more time and let the policies gestate, as we speak of just now? And do you feel that it's also important for us to look at an administration within a 5-year timeline every single time?
Okay, asking about the people, that's the difficult part. If I may tie it back to the polarization that we discussed earlier, so we have all of these different views, of course, right? So, of course, I hear a lot about people asking, dissolve it now because we're not happy with the government right now. Let's have a brand new administration. But don't forget, there's only a segment of Malaysian population. There's those that are saying, no, let this government run its course, give it 5 years.
They have a mandate. That's
exactly.
the thing. Yeah.
So why are you pushing to ask for a new administration? If you're not happy with what's going on, you can just pressure the current government without having a brand new administration every time you're unhappy.
Yeah.
Right? So that is how I see it, that there's no clear united voice on what the people want at the moment.
Okay. And on the reforms, do you feel that this administration should continue on with the reforms? I mean,
right.
Separation of AGPP, 10-year limit, but there's so many other reforms that the government is currently doing and wants to do, and should we welcome it?
Yeah, we should. And you were asking earlier about letting the government run for its full term, right? Yeah, I believe so. Like if they were voted in, let them do what they can in the 5 years that they were afforded. And if you don't like them, then you can vote them out, right? That's not a big problem if we believe in this democratic cycle. For the reform specifically that we talk about, yes, I think they should go on with it, but of course take into consideration all views that are given from within and outside the government, because we want these reforms to actually work. Because especially, if I may add, if we talk about the 10-year limit for the Prime Minister, yes, it looks good on paper, but sometimes we don't talk about the Prime Minister might leave after 10 years, but he might still have influence in other ways. So this is why we have to think of it holistically. The Political Funding Act is very important. So it's a wide reform, and I think the Pakatan Harapan government is serious about it. So let them do their job and see if they can fulfill those promises.
So you feel that it should be read together, for instance, the Political Funding Act, the PM tenureship, curbing the influence of the PM, because nothing stopping the PM from becoming, say for instance, the Finance Minister in year 11, say for instance. I mean, these are all, of course, while it's hypothetical, it's also a realistic scenario to be built upon.
Yes.
And should never be taken into isolation.
Correct, yes.
That means there's a lot of work. I mean,
Yes.
There's a lot of work. It's not just saying, okay, this is a trick and there you
done.
go, and done. So it's a long journey, I suppose, for the government to actually embark on. Yeah. Okay, there's of course plenty of things to discuss, but our time has come to an end. That was Associate Professor Dr. Syaza Shukri of IIUM. She's also a fellow at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And of course, if you want to learn more about conversations such as this, you can head on to astroawani.com and find out more there. Till then, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.